Morphine doesn't smell like anything. That's the part nobody tells you. People expect it to smell clinical, chemical, something to match the gravity of what it does. But it doesn't. It smells like nothing at all, and somehow that's worse. Nora Vasquez had worked the night shift at Riverside Community for going on 7 years, and she had learned to identify every medication by its absence of smell, the same way she had once learned to identify incoming fire by the specific pitch of air displacement. Neither skill was listed on her resume. She stood at the dispensing cabinet in the East Corridor at 2:47 in the morning, running her thumb down the inventory manifest with the same mechanical attention she gave to everything. The hospital at this hour was a particular kind of quiet. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but exhausted. The floor smelled of floor wax and something faintly sweet underneath that she had never been able to fully identify and had stopped trying to. The overhead fluorescence pulsed with a steady, colorless light that flattened everything it touched. Down the hall, someone coughed. A monitor tripped an alarm for 3 seconds before silencing itself. A cart with a bad wheel squeaked past the supply room door. Nora didn't look up. She was 37 years old and had the kind of face that people described as plain when they were being generous. She kept her black hair pulled back with a rubber band she'd taken from a bundle of patient intake forms. She wore scrubs in a shade of faded teal that had been washed so many times the color was almost theoretical. She had bought them used from a hospital resale bin in Tucson 3 weeks after she came back, because her old ones no longer fit right. Or maybe she no longer fit inside herself right, and the scrubs were easier to replace. That was 7 years ago. She had made herself into furniture since then. The night shift nurse who never called in sick, never asked for overtime, never lingered at the nurse's station after the day crew arrived, smelling of fresh coffee and real lives. She took the holidays nobody else wanted. She answered the calls that came in at 4 a.m. She did not make friends, and she accepted the particular loneliness of that the same way she accepted the fluorescent pulse and the phantom sweet smell and the bad wheel cart that always came around at the same hour every night. Routine was not comfort, but it was management. Vasquez. A voice behind her, flat and tired. She turned. It was Dembski, the charge nurse on duty, a heavy-set man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up into his thinning hair and a perpetual expression of low-grade grievance. He held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. Trauma bay. Incoming. She was already moving. The call had come through the ambulance radio at 2:51. A woman, mid-40s, ejected from a vehicle on the interstate underpass. Blunt force thoracic trauma. BP crashing. ETA 4 minutes. Nora heard the specifics the way she heard most things at this hour, through a filter that stripped away the noise and left only the data. Thoracic, blunt force, BP crashing. She ran a quiet internal inventory while she walked. Chest seals, decompression needle, the particular angle of a tension pneumothorax presenting on the left versus the right. The bay was already filling when she arrived. Dr. Tennyson, the attending, was still tugging on a pair of gloves and asking for a verbal from the paramedic. He was a decent physician, competent, cautious, the kind of doctor who double-checked everything twice and was almost never wrong, which meant he was also almost never fast enough. The paramedic, a young woman with a fresh bruise on her chin from what looked like a patient elbow, delivered the rundown in a clipped monotone. 51-year-old female, unrestrained passenger. Rollover at approximately 60 miles an hour. Obvious rib fractures right side, decreased breath sounds left, pressure was 90/60 when we loaded, dropped to 70 on arrival. She was conscious briefly, asked us for her dog. The gurney came through. Nora stepped in. She didn't push anyone aside. She didn't announce herself. She simply moved to the left side of the patient, with the quiet economy of someone who had learned that unnecessary motion was the same as wasted time, and wasted time had a body count. The woman on the gurney was gray, not pale, gray, the specific gray of someone whose blood was leaving the places it was supposed to be and pooling somewhere interior and catastrophic. Her lips were the color of old chalk. Nora pressed 2 fingers below the left clavicle. "She's got a tension pneumo on the left," she said. Not loud, not insistent, just factual, the way you'd tell someone that a door was locked. Tennyson looked over. He was listening to the opposite side with a stethoscope. "I'm not hearing. She's compensating. She won't be in about 90 seconds. Nora straightened up and looked at him directly. "She needs a needle decompression now. Second intercostal, midclavicular." There was a fraction of a second where the room hung on Tennyson's response. This was the part Nora had never fully relearned since coming back. The social calculus of a hospital hierarchy. The way authority operated through chain and not through urgency. In the valley. In the places she'd worked, where the only authority was whether someone was still breathing. There had been no waiting for permission. Tennyson read her face. He had worked with her for 4 years, and whatever he thought he didn't know about her, he had learned to read that particular expression. "Do it," he said. She did. The needle went in clean. The hiss of released pressure was immediate, obscene. The sound of a body suddenly able to do what a body was designed to do. The monitor's readout lurched and then steadied. The gray woman on the table drew in a breath that rattled and then opened. Someone at the back of the bay exhaled. Nora stepped back out of the way as the team converged. She stripped off one glove, checked the clock, stripped off the other. Tennyson was already calling for the chest tube setup and the surgical consult. The crisis had a shape now. Manageable, survivable. She had handed it off. She walked out of the bay and back to the dispensing cabinet, where her inventory manifest was still lying open on the counter. She picked up exactly where she had left off. At the end of the shift, Dembski stopped her on her way to the locker room. "Nice work in there," he said. He looked uncomfortable about saying it, which she appreciated. She didn't like compliments that came easily. "Tennyson made the call," she said. "Tennyson made the call because you already made it for him." She looked at him for a moment. He was watching her with the look she recognized and disliked. The same look that people got when they sensed something underneath her surface that she had not given them permission to see. "Get some sleep, Dembski," she said, and pushed through the locker room door. She drove home through the hollow 6 a.m., streets with the windows down slightly, letting in the October air. The city at this hour was soft-edged and indeterminate. She passed a gas station, a shuttered laundromat, a man walking a large brown dog with the unhurried gait of someone who had nowhere to be and was at peace with it. She watched the dog until the rearview mirror took it away. Her apartment was small and deliberately sparse. She had lived there for 4 years and had accumulated almost nothing: a bed. A kitchen table with 2 chairs, one of which she'd never used. A shelf with a few paperback novels she'd read twice, and a small succulent in a terracotta pot that she watered on Thursdays and felt nothing about either way. On the wall above the kitchen sink, someone in a previous tenancy had left behind a framed print of a lighthouse, and she had left it there because taking it down would have required her to own the decision. She didn't drink anymore. She had stopped 18 months after she came back, when she realized she was drinking the way she had once applied tourniquets, with the specific pressure and urgency of someone trying to keep something from bleeding out. The bourbon wasn't comfort. It was compression, and compression that didn't address the source wound, just delayed the inevitable. She made coffee instead. She sat at the kitchen table and drank it slowly and didn't look at anything in particular. And after a while, she went to bed and didn't dream, which was its own kind of mercy. She slept until noon, showered, ate a bowl of cereal without tasting it, and drove back to the hospital. That was a Tuesday. On Thursday, they arrived. She was in the medication prep room when Dembski knocked twice on the doorframe and leaned in. He had the expression of a man delivering news he wasn't sure how to categorize. "You have visitors," he said. She looked up. "I'm not on break for another hour. They're not asking about a patient." He hesitated. "They asked for you by name." The words landed with a particular weight. People asking for a nurse by name in a hospital after midnight usually meant one of three things: a grateful family following up, a complaint, or something she had learned not to name aloud. "How many?" she asked. "3, Dembski said, plus one in a chair." She set down the syringe she was capping. She didn't ask what they looked like, because part of her already knew. Not specifically, not in terms of faces, but in terms of the thing she had spent 7 years learning not to feel, the low seismic tremor of recognition. "Tell them I'll be out in 5 minutes, she said. She stayed in the prep room for 8. When she finally came out into the corridor, she walked slowly enough that her mind could run its inventory the way it always did. Threat assessment, exit locations, nature of the situation. Old habit. 7 years of hospital linoleum had not erased it. Probably nothing would. They were in the waiting area, off the main corridor, past the triage station. She rounded the corner and stopped. There were 4 of them. 3 standing, 1 in a wheelchair, and the one in the wheelchair was who she looked at first, because he was the one who had changed the most. The man in the chair had been 24 years old the last time she had seen him. He had been on his back in the dirt with both legs destroyed from the knee down, and he had been telling her, with the specific calm of someone who has accepted a version of death, that she should leave him and get the others out. She had told him, with the specific calm of someone who had not accepted anything, to stop talking and apply direct pressure where she was pointing. He was older now. His face had the particular aging of men who had been through the fire and come out the other side. Settled into its lines, not bitter, just weathered in a way that made him look more himself rather than less. He was sitting straight in the chair with his forearms on the armrests, and below the cuffs of his jeans, where feet should have been, were the matte black forms of prosthetic ankles resting in a pair of clean running shoes. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The man standing to the left was Castellano. She recognized him by his posture before she recognized his face. He had always stood the same way, weight shifted slightly left, head at a particular angle that suggested he was listening for something just outside the range of human hearing. His hair was shorter now, and he'd grown a beard, dark and close-trimmed. There was new tissue on his right forearm, a wide, pale strip where the skin had been replaced, shiny in the fluorescent light. The woman standing behind him she didn't recognize immediately. And then she did. Ewan, who had been communications on the extraction team, who had been 30 feet behind Nora when the second device went off, who Nora had last seen being loaded into a helo with one hand pressed flat against her own sternum, and her lips moving in something that might have been prayer or might have been inventory. It was hard to tell from a distance. Ewan was standing on her own 2 feet in civilian clothes with her hair down. She looked like someone's sister at a family gathering. She looked fine. The 4th person standing was someone Nora didn't know, a younger man with a quiet, watchful face, who stood just slightly behind, and to the right of Castellano, the way a person stands when they've learned to account for the blind spots of the person in front of them. Nora stopped 6 feet away. For a moment, nobody said anything. The corridor sounds continued around them. The distant beep of a monitor, the low hum of the ventilation system, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum somewhere down the hall. The ordinary machinery of a functioning hospital going about its business, indifferent. Vasquez, Castellano said. His voice was the same. That was the thing she hadn't expected, that his voice would still sound exactly like itself, unhurried and slightly rough, like someone speaking a second language they'd mastered but not quite naturalized. Castellano, she said. She looked at the man in the wheelchair. Tate. Hey, Vasquez, Marcus Tate said. He sounded exactly like a man trying to sound casual and not entirely succeeding. She looked at Ewan. You're walking. So are you, Ewan said. It was a stupid exchange. They both knew it. Neither of them acknowledged that. What are you doing here? Nora asked. She kept her voice level. Level was the only setting she trusted herself with right now. Not cold, not warm, just flat and functional, like the light in this corridor. We've been looking for you for a while, Castellano said. I wasn't lost. We didn't say you were. He paused. You're hard to find. I know how to be hard to find, she said. That's not an accident. She was aware of Dembski hovering at the periphery of her vision, near the triage station, trying to look like he was doing something with paperwork. Down the hall, one of the younger nurses, a new hire, barely 6 weeks in, still startled by things that had long since stopped startling Nora, was watching with the uncomplicated curiosity of someone who had no context for what they were looking at. We were all in the same city for a medical conference, Yoon said. Tate had a follow-up at the VA. We thought. She stopped. She started again. It took us 4 months to find a current address. A work address, Nora said, not a home address. We respected that. Nora looked at the 4th man, the one she didn't know. Lieutenant Osi, Castellano said. He was with 2nd Team. He wasn't in the valley, but he was. Castellano stopped in the way that people stopped when language became inadequate and they could feel it happening. He's part of this. He wanted to come. Nora looked at Ose for a moment. He didn't try to speak, which she respected. He just held her gaze steadily, and she understood from the way he was standing, from the specific quality of his stillness, that he had his own valleys, even if they weren't her valley. She nodded once. He nodded back. You didn't have to come here, Nora said. She was talking to all 4 of them, and specifically to none of them. Whatever you're here to say, you could have. There are channels. Channels didn't work, Ewan said quietly. We tried. Your file is buried 6 layers deep, and the address we had from before was a P.O. box that closed in 2019. I know, Nora said. You chose that. Yes. Another silence. The monitor somewhere beeped its patient, indifferent rhythm. The thing is, Tate said from the wheelchair, and his voice had changed, had dropped out of the forced casual and into something else, something rougher and more honest. We needed to see that you were okay. She looked at him, at the prosthetic ankles resting in their clean shoes, at the 7 years written in the lines of his face, at the hands that were resting on the armrests, with the deliberate stillness of someone who had learned to control their hands, because hands could shake if you let them, and shaking was not something you let people see. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Sure," he said. She felt something shift in her chest. Not break, not release, something more complicated than either. The way old scar tissue shifted when you moved a joint through an angle it had learned to avoid. Not pain exactly, the memory of pain, which was its own category. "This is not a good place for this conversation," she said. "We know." Castellano glanced around the corridor. "We're not here for a long conversation." "Then what are you here for?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. She watched his hand the way she watched everything, not with suspicion exactly, but with the attention of someone whose threat assessment had never fully decalibrated, probably never would. He produced an envelope, standard size, off-white. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. "We took a collection," he said, holding it out. She didn't take it. "It's not money," Yuen said quickly. "It's letters, from people who knew what happened, or part of what happened, people who were able to find out." She paused. "There are names in there you'll recognize." Nora stared at the envelope, the night she had left the valley, the specific night, the specific hour. She had made a choice that she had never fully examined in the daylight, because examining it required looking at the whole shape of it, and the whole shape was something she hadn't been ready to see. What she had done and what she hadn't done, what she had gotten out, and what she had left in the dirt with the blood and the sound and the weight of a body she could not carry. Corporal Mendez had been 19 years old. She kept his face out of her head, always, the way you kept a wound out of direct light. Not because the light hurt it, but because light was how you assessed the damage, and she had assessed enough. "I don't want letters," she said. "Vasquez, I don't want to be thanked." Her voice came out flatter than she intended, and she leveled it back down deliberately, the way you leveled a liquid in a tube. "I know why you're here. I understand what you're trying to do, and I'm telling you it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. You can't bring what you have in that envelope in here and give it to me and have anything change." "We're not trying to change anything," Yuen said. "Then what?" "We're trying to close something," Castellano said. He said it quietly, and the quietness of it was the most honest thing anyone had said in this corridor in a long time. "Not for you, for us. We couldn't move forward while you were just gone. While we didn't know if you were—" He stopped. "If I was what?" "If you were okay," Tate said again, from the chair. She looked at him, at his hands on the armrests, at the particular steadiness of a man who had learned the hard way how not to fall apart in corridors. "Mendez," she said. The name came out of her like something she'd been holding at the back of her throat for a long time. Nobody flinched. She hadn't expected them to flinch. These were not people who flinched at names. "I know," Castellano said. "I was with him for 11 minutes. She didn't know why she was saying this. She hadn't said this to anyone in 7 years. Not to the debrief officers. Not to the trauma counselor she'd seen twice and then stopped going to. Not to the empty apartment ceiling at 3 a.m. 11 minutes before evac reached us, and I couldn't. I had both hands on it. I had pressure on both sides. And she stopped. It was a femoral artery. The fragment was still in there, and when I tried to, the pressure change, Vasquez. Castellano's voice was firm and specific, the way you made a voice firm and specific when someone was starting to go somewhere that would not help them. "He was 23 seconds from being savable," she said. Maybe 30. Maybe a full minute, I don't know. I will never know. But if the evac... Listen to me. Castellano stepped forward, not close, not in her space, but close enough that she had to see his face, had to register that it was him and not just a voice. Ortega was on the evac. He came to see me 2 years ago. He said there was a secondary IED on the approach route. They had to redirect. It added 8 minutes to their response time. She stared at him. 8 minutes, he said. It wasn't 30 seconds. It wasn't a minute. There was nothing you could have done with 30 more seconds. She hadn't known that. Nobody had told her that. The debrief had been classified and stripped and redacted until what remained was a skeleton of events, without the connective tissue that made events into something you could actually process, and she had been discharged before the full report was available, and she had not gone back to look because going back to look required going back. That doesn't make it better, she said. Her voice was completely flat now. Knowing the math doesn't make it better. No, he agreed. But not knowing the math was making it worse. The corridor hummed around them. Somewhere down the hall, a patient called for a nurse, and one of the night staff responded in the low, reassuring murmur of someone whose job was reassurance. The ventilation system ran its steady, indifferent breath through the overhead ducts. Nora looked down at the envelope in Castellano's extended hand. It was creased at the corner, slightly bent, as if it had been handled and carried for longer than just tonight. "How long have you had that?" she asked. "Since August," Ewan said quietly. "It took us until now to find you." She looked at Tate. He was watching her with the expression she still couldn't name. Not pity, not sympathy, not the careful optimism of people who wanted her to be better than she was. Something older than any of those. The expression of a person who had been in the same dark room and found their way toward a door and understood exactly how long the distance was, and did not pretend otherwise. "Are you?" she asked him. "Okay." He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. She appreciated that he didn't answer immediately. "Getting there," he said finally. "I work with a program now, veterans, peer support." He glanced down briefly at the prosthetics and then back up. "Turns out the thing I'm useful for is telling people I've been where they are, and still showed up the next day. It's not a glamorous job. Does it help? Them, I mean. Some of them." He shrugged with one shoulder, the same way he always had, the same shrug she'd seen when he was 24 years old and cataloging his own probable death with the equanimity of someone taking inventory. "You helped me, Tate. I don't mean in the medical sense." He held her gaze. "I mean afterward. When I was at Walter Reed, the nurse on the night shift there had this same energy you have, that same I'm just doing the job thing. And I used to watch her and think about you. I thought about this specific night nurse who had stayed with me for 45 minutes in the dirt, just applying pressure and talking to me, telling me about her grandmother's house in New Mexico. Completely mundane, because you knew if you let me go quiet, I'd go somewhere I couldn't come back from." She had forgotten that. Or she had put it somewhere she didn't go into. The grandmother's house, the tiled kitchen floor, and the smell of red chili, and the light through the screen door in the afternoons. "I talk a lot when I'm scared," she said. "I know," he said. It worked. She reached out and took the envelope. She didn't open it. She held it at her side, and the weight of it was negligible. Paper and ink, the most weightless materials in the world. But her hand registered it as something heavier than it was, as if the letters inside had density. "We're not asking you to be anything," Castellano said. He had stepped back. He was watching her with the same careful distance he'd always maintained, the particular respect of a person who understood that some people processed best when no one was too close. "We're not asking you to come back, to talk, to go to the group sessions or the VA or any of it." He paused. "We just needed to see your face." She looked at the four of them, at Castellano's scarred forearm, at Ewan's careful, fine-drawn face, at Osei's patient, respectful stillness, at Tate in his wheelchair with his prosthetic ankles and his peer support work and his almost okay. She thought about the gray woman on the gurney earlier in the shift, about the hiss of released pressure, the body suddenly able to do what it was designed to do. "I'm here," she said. It wasn't a profound statement. It was the most accurate one she could make. "Yeah," Castellano said. "You are." There was no ceremony to how they left, no salutes, no formal goodbye. Castellano pocketed the hand he'd extended and gave her a single nod. Ewan reached out and briefly, lightly, put her hand on Nora's forearm, just a second, less than a second, and then withdrew it. Osei nodded, and she nodded back, and that was everything that needed to be said between two people who had never met but understood each other in the specific language of people who had survived things that didn't have civilian translations. Tate maneuvered the wheelchair to turn it toward the exit. He glanced back at her once, over his shoulder. "Nice place," he said, meaning the hospital, meaning the opposite of nice, meaning you built something here. "Get some sleep, Vasquez." She watched them go down the corridor, past the triage station where Dembski was making a great show of studying a clipboard, past the young nurse who had given up pretending not to stare, through the double doors at the far end of the hall. The doors swung shut behind them with the soft, definitive sound of something ending. Dembski materialized at her elbow. He looked like he was choosing from a menu of things to say and finding all of them inadequate. She saved him the effort. "Bed 7 needs her pain meds rechecked," she said. "The dosage on the chart doesn't match what was dispensed at 2200. "Right," he said, grateful to have something to do with his hands. "Right, I'll do it," she said. She tucked the envelope into the front pocket of her scrubs and walked down the hall toward bed 7. She didn't open it until she was in the parking lot at the end of the shift, sitting in her car with the engine running and the heat going because the October morning had turned cold while she worked. She pulled the envelope out and looked at her name written on the front in that unfamiliar handwriting, careful and deliberate. Someone who had taken their time. Inside were 7 letters, some long, some short. She didn't count them at first. She just let them unfold across her lap in the pale morning light coming through the windshield, a weight of paper and words from people who had carried something alongside her or after her, or instead of her in the years when she had been unavailable for carrying. One of the letters was from Mendez's mother. She almost put it back. Her hands did the motion of putting it back, the fold and the intent, and then stopped. She read it. It was 3 paragraphs. It was not forgiving her because there was nothing to forgive. And it was not thanking her because it was not about her. It was about him, about who he was, who he had been before, and the small specific things his mother wanted someone else to know. That he could not cook anything without burning it, but tried every Sunday anyway. That he had a dog named Cleo, who had waited by the front door for 7 months after. That his mother had been told by the debrief officer that he had not been alone, and that she had held that information like a stone in her pocket for years, smooth and constant, and had wanted to say that to the person who had been there. He had not been alone. Nora sat in the car for a long time. She wasn't okay. She was not going to be okay in the way that people meant when they said it, the uncomplicated, complete sense of the word. 7 years of night shifts had not solved anything, neither would 8 or 9 or 15. The valley was permanent. Mendez was permanent. The weight of what she carried was not the kind of thing that got set down. But she thought about what Tate had said. I work with a program. I tell people I've been where they are, and still showed up the next day. She thought about the gray woman on the gurney and the hiss of released pressure, the body being able to do what it was made to do. She looked down at the letter in her lap, at the careful handwriting, at the small, specific weight of Mendez having had a dog named Cleo who had waited by the door. She folded the letters back into the envelope and put the envelope in the glove compartment. Not away, not hidden, just placed there, in a location she knew. She pulled out of the parking lot and drove through the cold morning streets. The city was coming awake in its slow October way. Lights going on in apartment windows, a woman walking her child toward a bus stop, a delivery truck idling outside a coffee shop. The ordinary world doing its ordinary things. The light changed. She stopped. She waited. When it turned green, she drove.